So we will share slides and transcripts at least of the recording, but perhaps the full recording in the days to come after the conference. And that goes for tomorrow's session as well, where we will cover the other counties in the region. So hopefully, though, folks will pay special attention to this next hour between 10 and 11. I will go over a couple of the logistics about how the forecast program runs and how we can gather input from you about what's going on in the region that will help inform both the revisions to the county forecasts that we'll see today, as well as our initial sub-county city UGB forecasts that we'll be presenting in the next few months. So today's presentation will focus on the state level results as well as the county level results. And then the next step is we will revise the counties, and then we'll do an initial sub-county, and then we'll have another final round after that with an eventual publication of the final forecasts by next June. So a couple of people have asked how they can get involved, and participating in these conversations is a great way. The other thing that we really encourage folks to do is to visit our website. I'll take over Neil's screen sharing for a minute, and I'll show you where you can visit. So if you are to put in your URL pdx.edu/PRC, that will take you to our center's website. And there's a few things going on about the forecasts. I will mention this announcement in a minute and what's going on here. But first, I wanted to direct you and show you how you can participate in our survey, our forecast survey. And you can hit that by going to the population forecast page, and then going to the participation button on the forecast page. That will take you to some information generally on the cycle of reviews, as well as this link here for the forecast survey form. So everyone is invited to participate in this. You can do it online. You can do it as an email or a Word document, really however you want to get it to us. We're happy to take it. I'll show you what the online form looks like, and you'll get the same thing if you download the Word form. So you can get a sense of the kind of questions we're looking for. So the key things that we're interested in knowing about is kind of a 5-year short run forecast or discussion of what the conditions are like, especially regarding housing or any kind of major group quarters facilities. Is there a new correctional institution being built, somewhere in your jurisdiction? Is there a dormitory that's being expanded that would have a significant impact on population? Or a skilled nursing facility that's opening or closing that could, has a large impact relative to the population of your jurisdiction? The other thing that's interesting to hear about and learn about are kind of constraints on building that may be coming in or going out. So one example is, jurisdiction who was under a building moratorium because of insufficient water resources. That was a condition that had kind of been in place for about 5 years and was going to be ending within the next 5 years. So that was really critical information that helped us understand what we were seeing when we looked at the population and housing growth data, and understand that there was probably an artificial constraint that was, causing that forecast to be a little lower, that we wanted to make sure we had built in that assumption of a return to a historical average growth, pre-moratorium growth. And we wouldn't have known that had we not heard from the jurisdiction and the forecast program survey. So other things that could be happening too, major new employers, infrastructure projects like a major highway expansion or closures or things like that. And then also, I think there's questions in here too about what effects you've seen from natural disasters, if any. That can include things like drought as well as wildfire, as well as things, what you're seeing in terms of recovery from COVID. A lot of cases we kind of had to kind of build in an assumption of a return to normal, business as usual, pre-pandemic. And it was kind of a question of, when should that assumption be put in place? When should we expect to return to normal? Or were there things that appeared to be kind of permanently different? Things like work from home. Are you seeing a lot of folks moving in and doing work from home? all those kind of questions. They're really valuable to us. So if you haven't participated yet, the period is still open for a little while longer. And so hopefully in the next, before the end of November, we'll be able to hear from you on this. So the other thing that's going on with the forecasts is that we currently offer something that's well, let me put this another way. So for Region 2 and for other regions in the forecast program, some of those forecasts were done before we have results from the 2020 census. So we got the results in about August 2021, and so every forecast that's been done since then reflects what we know about the actual population counted in the 2020 census for each jurisdiction, for each county and each city. And so what we've done actually is to try and create an option for jurisdictions that haven't had a forecast done since the 2020 census to at least have an adjustment, a way to make an adjustment to our most recent forecast in light of the difference between what that forecast said for 2020 and what the census actually counted. So the way that we've decided to implement that after consultation with a couple affected jurisdictions and with the Department of Land Conservation and Development is to use a document called an interpolation template to allow folks to choose to make that adjustment or not. And so you'll see information about that if you visit our population forecast landing. There's a notice of amendment, which you can download and read. It explains a little bit, a little bit more clearly what I've just explained. And there also is a document that you can download and see what the population interpolation looks like. So if you're interested in reading the current program rules, as well as the ways in which we're proposing to change it, you can see that. And then if you'd like to download the interpolation template to see how you could actually use it, this is something that's been on our website already for a while, and currently have this item called Method A, which allowed you to enter in the population in 1 year and in an ending year, and it would give you all the single years. Our population projections have been provided for 5-year intervals, so folks who needed 1 year out of those 5 years have been using this. The thing that we've now added is this ability to use that same information above, but to add or subtract population to the starting period in 2020, based on what we learned from the census. So to give you one example, we can pick out one particular UGB area. Let's just take a look at Central Point. So what the information you're seeing here is that, I'll change that again. All right, maybe we'll pick a different one. All right, so the John Day UGB. What you'll see here in this green cell is what our forecast said we thought the population was going to be in 2020. And what you have here in the blue cell is what this 2020 census actually came in at for this UGB, and then this difference. So these aren't real numbers, it's 1,000 and 2,000, but if they were, essentially what we're saying is we overcounted this UGB's population by 4 people. Looks like we did a good job here. So so we actually would start with this population at 996 instead of 1,000 to account for that error that we had of 4 people. And so you would want to fill out both of these. In some places, they might be a little bit bigger. I think if we look at somewhere like, well, yeah, so it varies around the state. Sometimes for a small jurisdiction, even a small error can have a pretty big difference. We had one city that came back to us and said, when you look at the population count there was in 2020 and what our forecast was, there's actually no growth projected for that area because the census was high enough that it was equivalent to what we were saying was going to happen around in 2030. So
Ethan, I'm not sure they're able to see the template. It's still on the web page.
Oh, thank you. All right, let me. All right. Hopefully now the screen is showing.
Yeah.
Excel spreadsheet. Okay, great. Okay, so what I was kind of showing was that This document has been online for a while. It's called the interpolation template. It allows you to enter a starting population and an ending population, and then to get the single year populations, because our projections have been published for 5-year intervals. So the new facility that we'd like to add is to give jurisdictions the option of adjusting the forecast for the census result. And so it takes the information that's been entered here, but then adjusts the beginning year population according to the difference between what we forecast for 2020 and what the 2020 census actually said for any given UGB. So in this case, we said 1822, but our estimate of what the census said for the UGB was 1883. So we were under by 61 people here. And so we'll add those 61 people to our forecast. So that can help jurisdictions, when they're looking at their housing needs analyses. This can hopefully be a useful resource. So I hope folks will take some time to explore that. The information here, again, is on our website, and we are inviting feedback. We want to turn this around pretty quickly because the way we see it, it's only offering new facilities. It's not going to take anything away. Jurisdictions will still be able to use the forecast the same way they have. But for those that do want to see what they look like when you take into account the effects of the 2020 census, this is a new resource. And eventually, this will become depreciated because we will do forecasts for all regions of the state that take into account the 2020 census. So once that's done, it'll be another 2 years or 3 years until every region has been forecast. Then we'll modify the template and return to the original format. It will no longer be needed. Okay, so I can maybe answer some questions about that. Okay, I see there's a question in the chat for Carla. What if a community believes that the population was undercounted in the census? That's a great question, and there are really 2 things that I'd encourage you to do. The main process is called a count question resolution, CQR shorthand. What I'd like jurisdictions to do in that situation is to look at one of the tools we provided here on our main website, called Exploring Census Blocks in Oregon Cities and Counties. You click on this, and this will take you to a tool called the address count, and it will allow you to look and see what the city says block by block for your community. So I'm going to give you an example here of how you can use this and what you'll be seeing. You see a thin blue boundary for the city boundaries and a teal boundary for the urban growth boundary area for each city. The numbers you see are the counts of housing units in each block, where the blocks are shown in red, that the Census Bureau has found. We've also added these teal boundaries to show you what appears from the satellite imagery to be a structure of some kind. Maybe a housing unit, sometimes it's maybe a garage or a silo, it could be a number of different things, but it's kind of a guide point to review what the Census Bureau has said in your community. And if you do find discrepancies, we can work with you to get those reported to the Census Bureau. The time is running out to report these. We have until I want to say, maybe April of next year to get cases submitted. And we can talk more about the kind of documentation that you'll need to submit, but it's things like this that will be really helpful to provide to them to show them where you believe they're an undercount. So in this particular case, we would need to establish that these structures were housing units. So we have here 6 housing units reported in the census. And it looks to me like maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 8. This might not be a housing unit, maybe 9. So even if it's just these 7 units on the left, that's different than the census reported. If we can prove that these are housing units by providing addresses, then the Census Bureau can update their housing unit count. What they can't do is change the population count. But if housing units were missed in the census, and we can prove that, they will be assigned some population based on the average occupancy characteristics of the community that was counted in the 2020 census. So, and regardless of whether or not that case is successful with the Census Bureau, we also process that information, and we also update our own estimates for every jurisdiction in the state. And those can be reflected, we can go back and update the census baseline, and that will increase, in many cases, the city's share of of the total population of all cities, and therefore will affect the revenue formulas. Okay, well, I'll continue to monitor the chat, but at this point, I'm going to stop sharing, and I will hand the presentation back to Neil, who will give you a overview of the methodology changes and the statewide forecast before jumping into each of the preliminary results for each of the counties, or for half of the counties today. So maybe, Neil, we could take a look at just at that timing slide.
Yep.
Yeah, so folks would like you to stay until the 11 o'clock switch off. And then at that point, if you want to just come back to participate in the time period, which we'll be discussing your county, that's totally fine.
Great, awesome. Thank you, Ethan.
Thanks.
Can y'all hear me okay? Can you see this? See the presentation slides okay? Okay, awesome. And if you needed that link again, or the link to our where our preliminary population projections are going to be, they will be attached to these slides. These slides will also eventually get on the website, but happy to provide them to you before then as well, via email. You are at the Oregon Population Forecast meeting for Region 2. These are the projections made by our group here at Portland State University, and specifically the Population Research Center. Who is that? I'm Neil Marquez. I haven't met a lot of you. I am relatively new here, stepping in for Cindy Chen, who was here previously. I'm the Population Forecast Program Manager. Ethan, who was just speaking, is the director. These are also the other people on our team who you've probably communicated with, or have maybe communicated with at some point: Deborah, Huda, Gilbert, and David. Again, here is our schedule for today. We just went over that. I'm going to be going over an introduction of the point where we're at in this population forecast cycle, an overview of the methods that we're using in order to make projections for the counties in this cycle, and an overview of state level changes. And we are updating our forecasts for all counties simultaneously, and so we can provide these state level changes as well. And so that's what we're going to go over in the beginning section. It also gives you an idea of like what kind of changes we're going to be focusing on in terms of population dynamics. So the exact structure that we're going to go over for the state is what we're going to replicate for each of the counties. These are the counties we're going over today. If you don't see your county name here today, it's because we're going over your county tomorrow. So check back for the emails for the times on those. What we're going to do today is go over the 2022-2025 forecast cycle, where we're at. Give that methodology update, state level trends, and then that 30 minutes for each county, and include a 10 to 15 minute Q&A session for questions and also feedback, specifically looking into what information you've provided maybe on the surveys, and how we are projecting migration, and how you might expect migration to change in the coming years for your county. So just going over the forecast cycle to let y'all know where we're at. We are currently in the second region of forecast. The counties that are included for that are shown here on the left, and on the right-hand side, we have the map of Region 2, which includes Baker, Gilliam, Grant, Malheur, which we're going over today, Morrow, Sherman, Union, Umatilla, Wallowa, and Wheeler, which we'll be going over tomorrow. We are currently in the 2023 deliverable cycle, so we will be having these finalized projections provided to the put on our website and provided to each of the counties and the UGBs by May 2023. And this is the second set of coordinated UGB county forecast, the first set of which was completed earlier this year. This is the annual cycle that we have set up for ourselves in order to keep on track with the projections. Where we've gotten so far is through for this second region is July through August, updating the data, getting new birth and death data, as well as migration data, updating the methodology. We've substantially updated the methodology compared to previous cycles in order to accommodate an obligation for making projections by race and ethnicity that we're providing. Also, we've prepared all of the data for county level forecast. The data comes into us one way, and we have to clean and prep and make sure that that data is valid before we can make those projections. And then in the October through December timeline, which we're at right now, we distribute the data collection surveys, which y'all should have already received and maybe responded to, or you're going to be responding to in the next couple of days. We update the county level forecast for the preliminary county forecast, and that's what we've done and what we're going over today in our first public meeting, which is also happening now. We don't have the UGB forecast that will be done in winter in that January through March cycle, and you will be getting updates on those as well as more finalized estimates of the county level projections come March when we hold the second public meeting. So just a little bit more detail here. Our process for making population projections is we gather information about existing and planned future households as well as population change. And when we're talking about population change, we are looking at information on population counts, migration, births, and deaths going back for at least 30 years. These are going to be the data that largely are informing our county level forecast. We want to account for impactful events like COVID-19 and the economic recession. And we are also using household survey or general and housing surveys and accounting for new housing developments and GQ facilities. And those are going to really inform our UGB population forecast estimates as well. We develop demographic models, again, for mostly county level projections and make assumptions about future housing and population change. And we regularly revise these forecasts as we get new information in before the final sets of population projections go out. So just note that as we're posting these preliminary projections for the county level, but they will be updated by the time we get to the second set and the final set in May of next year. So just going into methodology there, I guess I don't think there should be any questions at this point. So I'm just going to jump into the methodology right now, and I'll stop after this section, maybe look for questions. We're specifically going to focus on the methodology for county level forecast. Because that's what we're going over today. We are developing forecast through 2050 using the Census 2020 data as a baseline, although we vet our estimates against the 2021 census population estimates as well. We do a cohort component model for these forecasts, and I'll go into that a little bit, but the cohort component model basically says we know that populations can change due to births, deaths, and migration. So by accounting for changes in births, deaths, and migration, we can get population estimates into the future by projecting each of these components separately from one another. And we're not just projecting the total population. In each of the counties, we're making projections by separate demographic subgroups. Specifically, historically, we've done this by age and sex. And in this cycle, we're also doing it by race and ethnicity by 5 general categories that we're using: Asian Pacific Islander, American Indian, Alaskan Native, Black, White, and Hispanic. The basics of the cohort component model are basically this. We have a population at some time t, and in order to get from that population at time t from a previous population at time t minus 1, we account for the births and add those on that happened in the previous year, subtract off the deaths that happened in the previous year, and then either add on positive net migration or subtract off negative net migration, depending on if more people are coming into the county or leaving the county. And again, we do this by specific age groups, sex, and race and ethnicity groups that I had mentioned on the last slide. We don't actually project the number of births and deaths specifically. Instead, what we do is project the birth rate and the death rate. There is good demographic theory on the direction of future birth rates and future death rates that we are building off of when we're making these projections, and it's easier to get a handle on how birth rate and death rate happen rather than actual numbers. So we're using that to our advantage, and then we multiply this birth rate and the death rate times the current population to get future numbers of births and deaths as we're moving forward. For migration, we actually are forecasting the migration events themselves. And the assumption that we're using is that the average of past migration that a county has observed is going to be the most likely scenario moving forward in terms of migration that is expected for that county. And of course, there's going to be a few exceptions moving forward, and I can get into a little bit of that on the next slide, on the next 2 slides. Just so you know where we're getting our data from. Our population data comes from historical population data from 1990 to 2020, which is estimated from the National Center for Health Statistics. They get data from the Population Estimates Program from the Census Bureau. And what they do is make a consistent data set by age, sex, race, and Hispanic origin, so that we have consistent categories from 1990 to 2020, rather than using updates that have happened over time from the census questionnaire. And it gives us a more comparable population over time to be accounting for. We use this for our denominators for figuring out death and birth rates. But to make the actual projections for a baseline population, we're starting with the 2020 census data. We have a lot of more faith in the census data because of the way that information is collected in comparison to the population estimates, which start from a census data point and then adjust based on the number of births and deaths that happen and best estimates for migration. So we're using this again, 2020 as a launching point. Birth and death data come from a combination from NCHS again and the Oregon Health Authority vital statistics. OHA provides us with detailed information on vital events occurring in Oregon, levels of detail that we don't get from the National Center for Health Statistics, but NCHS provides us with total US level information. So we get information on birth deaths across the US. For testing and validating, and NCHS also provides this consistent categorization for age, sex, race, and Hispanic origin as well. So it lines up with the population data that we're using. So we rely pretty heavily on that NCHS data. Migration data comes from the Census Population Estimates Program for state level migration statistics. And we use that as a calibration point, and then county level migration estimates are then calibrated to match total state level in and out. But we use a residual method accounting for births and deaths that happened in that population from the year previously, and look at the difference between the next year's population and last year's population after accounting for those births and deaths. Just a note on race and ethnicity on how we get those consistent patterns across time, even though the census is asking different questions. The methodology that they used is this method called bridged race grouping, and we use this for all data analysis, although we have detailed information on race and ethnicity for all populations from births and deaths as well that we are accounting for, and are looking to do more detailed race and ethnicity projections later on, but our preliminary ones are using these broad bridged race groups. Our assumptions and our modeling strategy that we're using for mortality and fertility, we expect sensible, smooth age patterns over time. Because we're doing estimates at 5-year age groups, we expect the mortality rates of individuals age 10 to 15 to be not so different from individuals 15 to 20, not so different from 2020 to 20 to 25, et cetera, et cetera. So we expect smooth mortality and smooth fertility patterns as well. A general assumption is that mortality rates will continue to decline for all age groups, while fertility rates will decline, but then stabilize over time. And this is based off of what we've seen across the US as a whole, as fertility rates drop, but have stabilized at a rate a little bit below replacement, about 1.5 births per woman. And this pattern is shared across counties. So we expect similar patterns across counties unless there is sufficient data to push us away from believing that we should expect to see these general patterns. And this is why we now do all of our estimates together for the entirety of the state, because we pool data from across the state to make better informed estimates. And because from year to year variation, there might be just a large number of births or a large number of deaths in one year, but we don't expect in one county, but it may be an anomaly, and we don't expect that to continue into the future. Migration trends are again done with counts, and we expect again to see similar counts to what we have been observed in the past. We do account for trends in some instances when it does look like a county is veering in either a positive or negative direction in terms of in or out migration. Rather than modeling everything together as we do for mortality and fertility and pulling information for migration, we model those separately. We harmonize it again to make sure that it matches to the state level migration rates that we see. But county migration forecasts are all modeled independently from one another. And I just want to make a quick note on COVID-19, because I think this is something that's still on a lot of people's minds, and rightly so. The way that we're taking into account the effects of COVID-19 is that its effects on especially mortality and fertility represent a shock effect. And so we think that there will be a rebound to normal rates of or business as usual rates for mortality and fertility after a few year cycle. And so trending back to that over time. And I will stop right here just momentarily for any questions, but at this next portion, we'll be going over the state level projections and what state level trends look like. And I'll just ask Ethan, do you see anything in chat right now? If not, I can just keep moving forward.
Yeah, I think the question that came up is, how can we engage with this? Can this be a framework that we can use? Maybe Carla, maybe you can hop in to maybe explain a little bit more what your thinking is.
Are you asking me?
Yeah, just in terms of, is this something that you're interested in kind of applying? Because you mentioned about providing a framework to work from, and I'm wondering if you mean kind of internally for your own county work.
Yeah. Actually, I'm emailing with somebody else that's on the phone as we're listening to what you guys are talking about. I work for Boardman. I also do contract planning for Irrigan and Stanfield. And so I'm thinking about all three of those communities. And there's a couple of things that come to mind. Boardman in particular is a minority majority community. And I think there's always concerns that we've captured everybody that we should have in the census. So I think it's really important that we go back and figure out how we capture that and make sure that the count in 2020 happened. And because COVID impacted the count, and at the national level, they've already said that there were a number of states that they undercounted and a number of states that they overcounted. And so there's already this sense of how wrong might it be? And so how do we do that? So if there's any guidance that you guys as the professionals can help us with to understand how best to take that look back. I mean, your GIS layer, I think, will be really helpful because you captured that at about the time. So if we try to look at other GIS layers or other aerial from, that we may find elsewhere, it wouldn't be the right view. You're providing the right view for that. But then it's a matter of, I mean, in Boardman, we've had this huge boom. I mean, there's this huge boom. And I want to talk about that later when we get into the local level data. But how do we make sure we capture when things were occupied and were they occupied and why might it have been missed? So I think what I'm looking for is, do you have a 10-step, take these 10 steps, or do you have a, is there something that you would recommend to local communities who don't do this on a daily basis? I mean, we do this every 10 years. We help get the count done, and then we need to go back and make sure the count was done right. So, I look around in the building and, and in other communities, like, well, some of the staff weren't there last time this happened. So they may not know how to do this confirmation. And at the time I worked for a county, which is a whole lot different than the counts in cities. Cities have certainly seen more growth and more impacts. I guess that's what I'm looking for.
Okay, no, that's really helpful. Yeah, I think that, to respond just really quickly to a couple of your points that in terms of the Census Bureau studies of under and overcount in Oregon, they found no net under or overcount. That's not to say that certain places weren't. There could have been differential within the state, and they only look statewide. So it is a good issue to flag. I will kind of look through my resources. This is something that, that we're part of a network with other states, and some people have come up with good materials to kind of explain this process and how you would submit the evidence and what steps you would go through. So I'll try and dig up and see if I can find some of that stuff and put it on our website as well. I really am, glad to hear that you want to pursue CQR. We've been pushing places to do it. A couple places we've found errors on our own, but we can't submit them. So that's another thing I wanted to mention. It has to be highest elected official in that jurisdiction to submit them to the Census Bureau. Or if they give us a letter, empowering us to do that on their behalf, we can do that too. So there's a lot we can talk about on that sphere. And the only thing I would mention too is, like, it's enough to establish that a housing unit existed. We don't have to go in and find out how many people were there. We don't have to find out if it was occupied or vacant. In fact, that information, won't be used by the Census Bureau, and it probably won't be used by us. It's so hard now to know what was exactly going on back in April, right? That was a wild time. Lockdowns had happened, and then all kinds of stuff was going on. So it's just enough to know that that is a housing unit that was there and was not counted. And then we can kind of assume something about, okay, well, the vacancy rate in this town is, 4%. So we'll discount the population a little bit. And then the average household size in this jurisdiction is, 2.6 people. So we'll take 2.6 times, 96% of that for vacancy, and we'll assign some number of people to that household. And we've done that for a couple of jurisdictions that have gone out and done, field work, or small enough cities where they've actually gone and collected all the addresses. Other useful places to go are assessors data. And so, anyone who's interested in that's great. And I would encourage you to follow up with us. We can try and find some materials. And like I said, maybe we can post this to the website, and then we can, make sure we cover that in more detail when we go into the city results in a few months.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you.
And I do want to add, even though that we do hear definitely your concerns, even though, again, at the state level, there was no significant undercount and overcount. Those aren't divided down like into the different demographic subgroups. And we know at like the national level, there was an estimated Hispanic undercount. And I know there's concerns about like minority population undercount as well. It's something that we're thinking about. We haven't engaged with that, I will admit, to in these population projections right now. But I think, yeah, everything that Ethan said definitely holds, and just different ways that we can account for that. We would love to hear your feedback on as well. So thank you. Okay. We're running a little bit short on time, so I'm gonna move forward. Just go over this. This is gonna be the general trend for what we're gonna go over right now is total population changes in the state, births, as well as TFR, total fertility rate, deaths, and then life expectancy, migration and the age distribution of migrants, which we see in the state, population pyramids, and looking at increases in the older age population over time, and race and ethnicity. And we're also going to compare estimates to what had previously been estimated by ourselves at the last cycle for each of the counties in the state where applicable. So that's going to be total populations, but not births and deaths, but we will show those comparisons for the county level. And so just this general format is what you can expect to see for the counties, but we're going to go over so you can see the general state trends right now. Really quickly, we project that Oregon's population will continue to grow into the near future, albeit at a rate was slower that's observed in the past. As of the 2020 census, the census had a count of 4.24 million population, which is a 10.6% increase since the last census in 1990, when the population was 3.83 million. This is a slowing down of the population growth, which we have seen since happened since 2000, where the increase was 20%. So it's been going from 20 to 12 to 10.6%, and we expect a bit of decline and an increase in, or a bigger slowing down, a deceleration, if you will, of this population. And we'll get into a little bit on why we think that is going to happen. Our projections, our updated projections, are in this dark color, and previous projections are in the outline color. As you'll see, the total state level projections are a bit lower, about 2 to 3% lower than what we estimated in the past. I will say that there is a lot of variation from county to county. And I can say that most of the counties that we have for today are higher population estimates than we saw in the past. So if you're seeing this and being like, this doesn't look right, there's just a ton of county variation. And this is just what we're seeing at the state level as a whole. For births, again, getting into the components of population change, we think that after this decline that we saw relatively recently in the total number of births, that we think we'll see a bounce back in the total number of births. Part of that was impacted by COVID, but we also think that there is a postponing of births, general trend of postponing births till later ages now, that I think is going to reflect a slight bounce back in terms of the total number of births that are occurring, but it's going to be very stable, and we're not going to see a number of births like we saw in previous years. And so what I'm showing here is for each 5-year group, the average number of annual births that have happened in Oregon State. And so we're projecting slight increases, but mostly stable. And this is a general trend that you will see across most counties. What's this look like in terms of the total fertility rate? Again, the total fertility rate is if we expect a woman to have a number of children as equal to the age-specific fertility rate that is currently in the population, then these are the number of children we would expect them to have. 2.0 is a replacement, right? For every one woman, we expect them to have 2 children. Oregon had a total fertility rate of 2 in about the year 2000. Since then, it's continued to decline, and you can see in 2020 that impact of COVID-19, that big drop off. We expect it to sort of cycle back again to a total fertility rate trend decline of what we saw before, and then stabilize at like this 1.5, so about 1.5 children, 1.5 children per woman. a pretty different trend for deaths. We expect deaths will continue to increase over time, both as the population grows, but also ages as well. And again, what we're showing here is for each 5-year time period, the average annual number of deaths. And so what we're expecting in the future is a pretty big increase in the total number of deaths observed. This is a function of just a larger population. That is meaning that we're just going to have more deaths, but also a much older population that we're expecting to see in Oregon County in the coming years. And for some counties, we have seen big increases in older age populations and subsequent deaths already, and we just expect this to catch up to the rest of Oregon in coming years. Even though deaths are increasing, we don't expect life expectancy to decline, right? We expect life expectancy improving over time. Most of these deaths are occurring because the population is just older, but for any given one individual, we anticipate them to have better life expectancy as we move forward in time. Currently, Oregon has an estimated life expectancy of about 79.7 years, which is higher than the US average of 78.8. We expect it to get to about 80.1 in 2035. Or rather 81 in 2035. That number is significant because that is the highest state life expectancy that we have in the US. Hawaii is the one who has that life expectancy. And in 2050, we're estimating about 81.5 years of life expectancy. So increasing health and length of lifespans for people, even though we're seeing this increase in the number of deaths. State level migration kind of saw a recent boom, one that was similar to what we saw in the mid 90s as well. We expect a stable migration rate in the future. Migration is definitely one of the trickier things to estimate, not quite as high as what we saw in the past. But similar for a lot of locations. So an average of about 35,000 individuals migrating into the state per year, adding more to the population total than what we had observed in the past. And again, that's less than what we saw in the last 5-year period for the state, but we sort of don't expect to think that like those migration rates are sustainable, and this value of 35,000 is about what the average has been over the past 30 years. And so we expect this to maybe not one single year to necessarily reflect, this value of 35,000, but this to average out over time, right? For this to be the general cycle moving forward. And so we're applying the population, these people immigrating to Oregon into the population evenly across time. When it actually might happen might vary, and they might have some years with less and some years with more. This is the historical trends for what the age distribution of migrants has looked like. It's predominantly been young working age population. So about the 20 to 24 up to like the 30 to 34 population age. And as well as older age pre-retirement population. So from about 50 to 54 to 60 to 64, we also see a bigger bump in the number of people who are immigrating into Oregon. Again, there's a lot of county variation here. Some counties we see individuals of younger ages leaving the county. Some places we see older age individuals leaving the county. Some have the young population coming in, but not the older age population, and vice versa. A lot of variation here, but again, this is the general trend that we see across the state, is predominantly migration coming in from younger and older age working groups. Really quickly, I just would like to show this. This is a population pyramid. If you're familiar with population pyramids, they show the age and sex distribution of a population over time. And what we've done is animated this to highlight population change over time. So you can see what the structure of the state looks like and how that's been changing, as well as the count of the population. So this is colored by, oops, let's see if we can get this to go. Colored by cohort. So the red colors and yellow colors are older cohorts, and the greener all the way to like the purple colors are newer cohorts, moving from the lost generation all the way up to beta generation, which hasn't even been born yet. They're starting in 2030, but we're forecasting into those years. So I just want to highlight in 1970, the population is fairly young. That's where the bulk of the population is. And it gets like, it's called a population pyramid because it sort of looks like a pyramid, right? Skinnier at the top and wider at the bottom. Oh, whoops. Excuse me. Uh-oh. There we go. Over time, we can see this change a bit. So here is moving through the years, through the census. And I just want you to compare what we saw in 1970 to what we're looking at in 2020 in the latest census, right? It no longer has that pyramid shape. The biggest age group is now this 30 to 44 generation, which constitutes the millennial generation here. Working age population is the largest. And we see a growth in the population overall, but it looks very different from what we saw in 1970, right? Oregon just has a much older population that from 1970 to 2020. And we expect this aging process to get reflected as well into our forecast as well. So now when we move this forward through the forecast cycle, we can see this population continue to age over time. And by the time we get to 2050 here, now, again, we have this Gen Z is what we're expecting to be a bulk of the population, but they're even older now. Now that Gen Z in 2050 is representing 40 to 60-year-olds in this time group. And it's become, this population pyramid is no longer a pyramid, and it's very top heavy, right? And so it is a population of now of about 5.2 million by 2050 is what we're estimating, but a much smaller proportion of them are young individuals. And now it's an older working age population that's making up a bulk of this, this distribution, right? And part of that is kind of reflected in this view of population, where we're looking at the percentage of the population who is age 65 plus. So this is post-qualified retirement age. Prior to 2020, this never exceeded 15%. And we saw this big jump from 2010 to 2020, where it went from 14% to 18%, right? This is the biggest jump that we've seen in the state in quite some time. And we expect that to continue into the future to quite some degree. And the old age, the 65 plus age rather population is expected to hit 1.2 million by 2050, passing 1 million between 2030 and 2040. In addition, we also expect the county to diversify quite a bit, continuing trends that we have seen in the past. This is particularly driven by growth in the API Asian Pacific Islander population and the Hispanic population. The other populations are continuing to grow in size as well, albeit at much slower rates as well. So here we show the population forecasted for the state, but now divided by the different 5 different racial groups, which are categorizing people. And it's sometimes helpful to see this in a view that gets reflected like this, where it's just the total of the population. And so you can see from 1990 to 2020 from past censuses that the percentage of the population who was white is representing a smaller and smaller proportion of the state over time, and we're projecting a similar pattern moving forward for it to pass the 25% for the population who is non-white to pass 25% by somewhere between 2040 and 2050. So these are the state level trends. I know probably some of you have questions, but many of you are eager to get to the county specific ones, county specific data. We do have a few minutes for questions right now, which I want to open it up to. And I'll ask Ethan right now if he sees any questions in the chat that we can begin to address.
No, I don't see any questions about the state level results. I think one of the things we're really excited about is that, we are now incorporating our expectations on race and ethnicity dynamics as an additional dimension of the projections. And so that's something that hasn't been done before. And, we worked out with DLCD a way to start doing this. So we'll be doing that, not for cities individually, but for counties and for the state. Remains to be seen kind of how this program takes off. And so I think getting feedback on that is really valuable either to us or to DLCD.
Okay,
I guess I have one question. This is Carla. We
Hi,
had a
Carla.
power outage here, and so I was a little late jumping on. I don't know how much I missed. But the rule change, just briefly, if that would be an okay question. Could you just touch again? I'm sorry, like I said, I was a little late coming in. I think I might have missed your explanation, but you're trying to incorporate a way to adjust for census into the population forecast program. Would that be a simple summary? Is that correct?
Yeah, and I can give you an example that might help kind of, bring it down to earth. So, for example, we did a forecast for Sandy, for Sandy's UGB area. And we did that in 2019. You're using data up to 2019. We published that in 2020. So it was before we had the 2020 census. And so our best estimate of what the population was going to be in 2020 was around 11,600. When the 2020 census came in, turned out Sandy's population in the UGB area was actually closer to 13,000. So what that means is that our forecast for 2030 originally was 14,100. And if we account for that gap in 2020, we add that in. So that goes from 14,100 to 15,700. And so they would have the option to say, when they're doing their housing needs analysis, we want to use the original number. We've already tied to it. We're already set for that. Let's stick with it. Or they could say, we want to use that higher number because that gives us a more accurate picture of what our housing needs are going to be in the future, given where we're already at now. So it's not a mandatory to use the adjustment. Sometimes the adjustment will be downwards. Maybe we overestimated the population when compared to the census. And so jurisdictions may say, hey, we don't like that lower census number. Let's just stick with what PRC said. But in any case, until we have a chance to run through all the regions since the 2020 census has been published, there's this kind of gap between what came in and what we expected in 2020.
So just to understand how that impacts those of us that are in this cycle.
Yeah,
we're starting.
Yeah,
so we're starting with an estimate that is a PSU estimate that also hasn't been adjusted for the census numbers.
it will be by the time that we get it updated. So like when we shared the city or the UGB area projections with you in early next year, those will incorporate the 2020 census changes. But maybe there's a city out there that's kind of already got something going. The housing needs analysis is already kind of underway, and they need to submit something like in December. They can't wait until our estimates or our UGB projections are done in June. So they would have the option to use the old projections, but with that census adjustment to improve the accuracy. Of course, we'd like it if you can wait until June when we'll be done with what we think will be even better, but it's kind of a stopgap measure.
Okay. I think I get it. It's a stopgap so it applies now for a very short period of time. It's a rule that's just going to sit there for a period of time until the next census, and then it's available for you to do that stopgap measure again between when the census happens and when you do the estimates.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, makes sense.
So if anyone has any questions, I would be very happy to answer. the next session will be for Baker County. And Gilliam, Grant, and Malheur are after that. And so if you are not part of any of those counties right now, I just want to say thank you for coming. If you have any questions, please feel free to email us. We can get you the copy of these slides will be on the website in this coming week, and we can get you a copy if you would like one beforehand as well. On there is a link to the survey, a link to our website and everything. But if you have any questions before, please, and you don't have time to ask right now, please reach out to us. If not, I'm not sure how many, it looks like people are dropping off. How many of y'all are here for Baker County? Okay. I got Madison. Madison, you're representing Baker County. Would you like to take a couple minute break right now, or you want to just get going?
Does my audio work?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, perfect. I'm good to just keep going unless you guys need a break.
No, I'm good. I'm mentally prepared for this, so let's keep running on. Okay, awesome. Some backup slides. So this is going to seem really redundant in terms of like what the structure looks like, although a little bit more interesting because it's going to directly apply to the county of your interest and reflect those differences in births and mortality. So this is specifically for Baker County. And so the overview is going to be the same. We're going to do a population overview, total population, see how the different components contribute to changes in total population, and see the dynamics in terms of aging and race ethnicity on how that's changing in the county. So we are first looking at Baker here, and Baker has the county seat and largest city being Baker City, and we pulled this information from the last census. So this is coming from the 2020 census, and we bring this up just to make a comparison on where the county falls in comparison to the rest of the state. Baker's estimated population was about 16.6 or 16.7 thousand. It was about 20% age 0 to 17, which is very similar, under age 18, very similar to the state as a whole, but was a bit older in terms of the population who was aged 65 and above, that being 26.9% of the total county, whereas for the state of Oregon, it is only 18.6%. The population who is non-white is 10.6% for Baker compared to Oregon, which is about 25.9% in total. And the number of persons per household that we have estimated based on the census counts for housing units in 2020 versus the population was about 1.95. So that's a bit lower than what we see for the entirety of the state of Oregon at 2.31. So population projections, here is what we're seeing. So everything left of the line is from census data that we saw in previous census years. Everything to the right of the line is population projections, and in the dotted lines are our past population projections, which were in the cycle 4 years ago. So the big difference that you're going to see here is that in the previous projection cycle, there was an estimate of slight population declines for Baker County. Now we're estimating pretty decent size population increase, and this is something that we're looking for feedback on, because this is mostly due to a bit of unexpected migration in recent years that we see contributing to growth of Baker County. And so you can see even in the 2020 census, right, the actual count of data showed an increase of about 3% quite a bit from the last census, whereas our projections based off of what we were seeing 4 years ago, we estimated that there was going to be a population decline. And again, a lot of that is being driven by recent migration rates. So in migration, we're estimating to be even higher in more recent years than what we've seen in the past 10, 15 years. And that's what's informing our large growth of Baker population predominantly. It is not being driven predominantly by an increase of births. We expect births to continue, the number of births to continue to decline over time. And we expect to see this stabilization rate into the future as well, leveling off at about a little over 100 births per year period. This gets reflected in a TFR of about 1.4 that we're expecting an increase. So you can see TFR for the county has jumped around quite a bit. It was higher initially in earlier years, then lower, and we expect it to trend lower as well as we move forward into future years, being slightly lower than the state overall. Deaths will continue to increase over time as populations both grow and age. So we're expecting increases in the number of deaths that are happening in Baker County from what was observed in past years. Again, notice that like there was a bit of an increase in this past year, 2016 to 2020, that was being driven a bit by COVID, but we're expecting to see a bit of a rebound and before it continues to increase as expected in the normal trend. You can also see a bit of that reflected in the life expectancy estimates. We expect life expectancy to be about a third of a year higher than what it is for the state on average, slightly higher for the county. And so the number of deaths are really coming from an aging population rather than a decrease in health and life expectancy. This is the big migration change that we're seeing. So this is the 5-year average of what we saw for annual number of migrants. And if you remember the first slide, between 2000 and 2010, the population for Baker slightly declined, but between 2010 and 2020, there was sort of an unexpected increase. And this was really driven by relatively high migration in recent years. And we estimate that in the years between 2018 and 2019, there was even upwards of 250 individuals migrating in. And these are estimated migrants to the county that we expected because they couldn't be accounted for the records and births that we saw and births and deaths that we saw for the county. So we expect a stabilization of this trend, even though it has been increasing over time. We're not expecting it to continue to increase into the future, but even so, this is a pretty high rate of higher level of migration from what we have seen historically. And something that we are asking for feedback on or opinions, or why we think we've seen more recent high migration trends than what we've observed in the past happening in Baker. The age distribution is pretty unique in terms of where we're seeing in versus out migration. Out migration, we're seeing in young to young working age population, so individuals 10 to 24. Historically, we've either seen, or rather, 15 to 24. We have seen more out migration, people leaving Baker County in those age groups. But even in the adjacent age groups and the older age population, we've seen increases in the number of people who are coming into the county for those age groups, particularly between the ages of 50 to 65. Again, we are expecting growth for Baker population, but particular growth in the old age population. So this is the same thing here that we're looking at, population pyramids over time. And again, you see a similar pattern where in 1970, the population was very pyramid looking. with a big bulk of the population being made up by the young aged at the time boomer generation, and it's sort of tapering off until you get to the old ages. But by the time you hit 2020, which is the last, the last census data, so not into projections, the largest age groups are actually still boomers within the Baker County, but they are now aged, upwards of 60 for the current population. And this is what we expect to increase over time, a continued aging of the population. And so you're going to see in the next slide that we expect a, pretty big increase in the population who is aged 65 plus for Baker County. Again, over the past 2 decades, from 2000, we saw a jump from the population who is age 65 plus, representing 19% of the population, up to 26.43% of the population by 2020. So almost a 7 or about an almost a 8% increase right there. And we expect this to continue moving forward. And by 2040, by 2040, we expect the population who is 65 plus to represent over 1/3 of the total of Baker County. We anticipate that the diversity of Baker County will continue to increase over time. Similarly to the state level, this is predominantly driven by growth in the Hispanic population, although we expect to see a little bit of increase in both the API and Black population as well, and a stable, a slight increase in the white population over time. Just looking at population trends as a total percent of the county, we anticipate that by 2050, the non-white population will make up more than 20% of the total population, which is a big increase, but still not quite the levels of diversity that we're even seeing at the state at this current date and time. And at that point, I just want to open it up to questions. Madison, you're the only one I know for sure who is here for Baker County, but it looks like we have a few other people on the call as well.
I don't think I have any questions. It's I think this is pretty true to what we're seeing so far. Just a pretty decent sized migration within the last, I've only been here for a year and a half, but within the last year and a half has definitely been seeing an increase in that migration into the county. Just seeing the planning perspective, the number of new homes being proposed or built. But I think this is all, it's all making sense. So
Can I ask you a question? Can I flip the table? Yeah. So where, I'm just trying to get a better idea of this. Is this, where is this predominantly happening within the county, or where are these, this increase in building permits coming from? I'm just trying to get a better perspective of from the UGB and cities, where the growth in the county is predominantly happening, or is this pretty evenly spread out across the county? And
yeah, so it's, we do planning for both the city and Baker City and county. We're seeing a growth in the city. We actually are seeing more multifamily. We've just had a really big apartment complex, 12 units get built. That's really big for us. That's the first one we've seen. And I think our planning director said at least 10 years. And so we're seeing a lot of building in the city. We're also seeing quite a few permits for new homes in the county that are mostly farm dwellings. but some that are a lot of rural residential we're seeing as well. Those spots starting to fill up more.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So these, I mean, I think the biggest thing that, that Ethan and I talk about is like these estimates go into informing what the UGB look like in terms of like their boundaries. And so we just want to make sure that we have ample room for growth within the county or within the city. And so I'm seeing this and just like recent migration, it seems feasible, like it seems plausible that this could have happened. And so it's good to hear from you that this is also like what you're seeing and is reflected through your organization as well. So I think for now we'll hold on to these numbers and expect this high level of migration to hold relatively high level of migration to hold out and reevaluate if we can, if more data comes in.
So Neil, my name's Betty Palmer and I'm here for Baker County as well, although I'm not employed by the county or the city, and I'm recently retired from the school district. This is data that I tracked on a regular basis when I was worked as assistant superintendent. Curious about the live birth numbers that you're projecting. I know that while I was in the chair as assistant sup, that we were upwards in the county of 140 some years and certainly 120 on a regular basis. We're talking about in the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s.
Yeah.
And so, and kindergarten enrollment. So I would track that to watch kindergarten enrollment and preschool
Definitely.
enrollment. One of the things that I'm seeing that's impacting our, not necessarily our birth rates, but our school population is the inability of families to be able to access childcare. So people,
Yep.
and then the housing, between those two things, hiring teachers. I was on a team that hired 4 teachers. We worked for 5 months to try to find a rental that was available for them that were coming in from out of the area. Now we have interest from teachers in the valley moving here because of quality of life, recreation ability, but it was just squeaking in. As a matter of fact, the last teacher that I was on the team to hire last spring that was able to find homes, had started the school year, still not, but in 2 months could find a place to live. So I think
Gotcha.
those two things are really impacting us in terms of keeping young families in the area.
Totally. And I'm glad that you bring this up because like it brings in like the nature of just like this is a there's a feedback loop here, right? Like how the city organizes and builds is going to impact fertility rates. It's going to impact mortality rates. And so like we want to be like open to like the possibility that like if we're or acknowledge that if we're projecting lower birth rates, right? That the city might not think that it's just like, well, we have something then we don't have that have to build like in for capacity for this, right? And it leads me to think that like even though what we're seeing is like a pretty common trend in terms of went the wrong direction, it's slightly lower we're projecting because of like the rapid decline, like what we've seen historically is a pretty big drop off in the number of births per women from 2000 to 2020. And it's not, the projections are pretty in line with what we're seeing historically that happened in other counties in Oregon. That being said, something that Ethan and I have talked about is potentially scenarios where it's just like, look, we know that fertility has generally been on the decline, and what we're estimating is like a business as usual fertility scenario. But like, how could this change if we like accounted for like slightly higher fertility? And if you give us the rationale on like why that might happen, this could be something that we argue for as well. I can't say right now that, what is going to happen and with that, but it's, I appreciate you bringing up that information and because it's something helpful to keep in mind in contextual reasons. And it's something I'll probably, I'll see what we hear from other counties as well in terms of what they say. But yeah, thank you for mentioning that.
You're welcome. So I'm just going to add one more piece. And again, this doesn't make any difference in the data, but it may be something that some piece of information that would be interesting to you.
Yeah,
And that is that I've also talked with, so we have 2 local mortuaries that serve the county. And one of them in particular maybe serves 3 counties around us. And talking with that person last year, so here we are coming out of the pandemic.
yeah,
She had indicated that over the last 3 years, death rate had increased quite significantly. I asked if she thought it was COVID related, and of course they process that information.
right.
She said not necessarily, but extremes in temperature
Mhm.
seem to implicate higher levels of deaths for our older citizens, even
Yeah.
if they're in a controlled climate inside, that as they see hotter temperatures in the summer, colder temperatures in the winter, they see an increase in deaths for people that are either frail in health or older. I just thought that was interesting. And so that's a 3-year pattern. Did not feel like the rise was attributed
Related to COVID.
COVID particularly.
Thank you for bringing that up again. Yeah, that's something where it's a little bit hard to tease out looking at like the annual deaths or even life expectancy because, we're expecting more deaths as the population ages. Older age populations are a more vulnerable group to mortality. So it like you might have increases because health is worse or because the population is older, and it's a bit to like difficult to tease that, but that's something that I can look at and we can look at behind the scenes and see how that might have been changing and look into. So again, this is why we do the preliminary, right? So we can get information like this and figure out what to dig into for each of the counties. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Awesome. I think we are about shifting over in time. So I don't want to cut short the next presentation, which is going to be, I believe, for Gilliam. Awesome. And thank you, Betty. And Madison, I think. I appreciate your comments. Okay. Do we have people here for Gilliam County? I just want to make sure. If I could just get, I'm seeing 6 participants, 5 participants, and I just want to make sure if anyone is here for Gilliam.
So it looks like Kelly Smith is here from Gilliam. She doesn't
Okay.
have a microphone, yeah. And then I'm here, I'm Dawn, I'm here from DLCD listening in.
Okay,
Unfortunately,
awesome.
a lot of the planning department
I
staff
understand.
at the OA or at the league.
The
I
regional.
think yeah, perfect,
Yep.
thanks.
Yep, totally understand. Okay, that's helpful. I'll go over this because there's going to be a recording of it anyway for other people who may want to see it later. And I'll just plan on going through right now. So, yep, okay. And thank you for mentioning that, Dawn. Yeah, and so what we're going to go through here is a similar structure for what you saw for the state, going through Gilliam County population forecast for this cycle. Here's our team again. Again, very similar pattern to what we had for the state: population overview, total population, births, deaths, then their rates, migration and their age distribution. And then we're going to look at the total effects that has had in the population in terms of the aging of the population, as well as the race and ethnicity distribution of the population. So here we're looking at Gilliam geography and just throwing up maps to show where the county is in relation to the rest of the counties that we are forecasting here today. Some comparisons to the pulled from the 2020 census, comparing Gilliam County's information compared to Oregon, so we can see how the two compare in a couple of important key demographics that we're looking at. Last census estimate for the Gilliam was almost nearly 2,000 population, relatively small county, right? 20.1% of this was below age 18, which is pretty comparable to the rest of the state. However, the population who is age 65 plus was a bit higher, 28.9% than what we saw across the state more generally, which is 18.6%. Population who is non-white is 13.6 compared to 25.9%, 25.9% for the state as a whole. And Gilliam had a persons per household rate of 1.8. That's about 2,000 people compared to 1,100 households, which is a bit lower than what we see for Oregon, which has a higher ratio of people to households. So projections wise, here is what we're looking at for the county. Again, prior to 2020, 2020 and before is what we're looking at as census data. Post 2020, what we're looking at in the bold group is our projections. And the dotted line is what we estimated in our last county projections. The biggest thing that we see here for Gilliam County population is that between 2010 and 2020, whereas we saw a decline in population between 2000 and 2010, 2010 to 2020 saw a pretty big increase in the population, about 6.6%. This is a trend that we didn't anticipate to continue in the past one. And again, at that point, we didn't have census data and we are pretty far away from the census. The last cycle, of course, happening in 2019, just a year before the census took place. So it's a bit harder to gauge the population dynamics at that time. So now basing it off of recent trends, increases in the population and what we're seeing, especially with respect to migration, we're anticipating a increase in the population in coming years, mostly driven by migration, but also as well a decline in the population in later years that is mostly being driven by the fact that the population is going to be aging relatively quickly. We're going to expect an increase in the number of individuals who are older age population and increase in deaths that's contributing to population decline. Here, looking at births, we're looking at a number of 10 to 20 births of what we saw in the past and what we're expecting to increase, maybe a slight decline in what we were seeing before. But again, we're talking on an order of 3 to 5 births. Not very large, although this is large relative to the population. Again, we've seen high fertility rates in the past, but a pretty strong pattern of recent decline that we're expecting to increase into the future, crossing Oregon state lines, but then stabilizing at a rate between 1.4 and 1.5 births per woman by the time we hit 2050. Deaths we expect to increase over time. We are looking at increases to happen further down the line, and this is mostly driven by an older aging population and a slight growth of the population as well. We just have a bigger population. There's just a higher, more people susceptible to risk, so just an increase just from the number of people who could potentially die. And life expectancy is anticipated to be slightly declining over time. Historically had a rate that was a bit higher than the population than Oregon State overall, although there's a lot of ups and downs in the past 30 years that we have observed with it. So we're expecting a sort of stabilizing around the 80 years, which is again a bit higher than what Oregon State is right now, and what we're expecting for the county moving forward. In terms of migration, migration is projected to be consistently positive over time, and this is mostly driven by recent trends. So you can see here our estimates and the updated estimates are in the dark lines, whereas the outlined ones were the past PRC projections. And so this is really what was contributing to the difference of what actually happened in terms of like population increase versus what we projected. We were basically estimating continued or slight increase in migration. But what actually happened was a larger increase in migration than what had been observed in the past. And we're expecting there to be about 20 migrants coming into the county over time, continuing to the future, contributing to population growth. Outmigration is generally seen among young working age populations. So we are seeing people leaving the county from younger age groups, but people coming into the county in older age groups and that middling working age as well. This is historically what we have been seeing, and we are projecting this to be the age distribution of the migrants moving into the population into the coming years. Again, we can see through this population pyramid, 1970, the population is very pyramid structured, is very young, made up predominantly of the boomer generation. And then as we move forward in time, this changes pretty strongly, a big drop off in the boomer population until it increases again in 2000, 2010, and I'm going to pause it at 2020 because this is our last year of data. So we saw boomer generation leave the county before coming back in 2020, which is coincides with more in-migration to the population. And this was the kind of migration that I told you that we had been seeing, an in-migration of an older age population coming in. And we expect to see a bit of that moving forward. Again, declines in the younger age population. And by 2050, the population is expected to be about 2.2 thousand and mostly made up of older aged 65 plus aged individuals post-retirement age. And so here we get to see a bit of that reflected. Again, between 2000 and 2020, the percentage of the population who is age 65 plus increased almost by 10%, from 19 to about 28. And we expect a bit of that increase to continue in coming years, a bigger increase even than what we've seen in the past. And that's a bit reflected in that population pyramid that I just showed you. We just are at a cusp of the number of individuals who are almost 65, who by the next 10-year period are going to be 65. So there's going to be a big increase there. And mostly through boomer generation, again, aging into the 65 plus group. In terms of diversity, we're expecting an increase in diversity for Gillian County, and it's mostly driven by increases in the Hispanic and also slightly the Asian Pacific Islander population as well. Looking at the percentage of the population here for the different racial and ethnicity groups that we're looking at, by 2020, it was a little over 10% who is non-white. Excuse me, and that moves, we're expecting it to cross 25% by the time that 2050 hits. And I know no one is here from Gilliam, but I still will say that if you have questions or comments, for us, feel free to reach out to us via email, via telephone. You can find these preliminary population projections at the website below. And please don't hesitate to contact us, and we'll be happy to answer any questions in your have, in particular feedback about what you think about housing builds, housing permits, and migration, especially that you have seen into the counties or into the UGBs, that fall within Gilliam. If you are seeing growth in any of these locations, like we're projecting to continue to happen to the future, that would be good to hear back from you or hear reflected in the surveys. And it looks like we have I've tried to leave about 5 to 10 minutes for each of them for questions, but we don't have anyone here, so I'm just gonna pause right now. And take a break and run to the restroom and grab some water. Just grabbing water, I'm still in the meeting. Okay. Oh. Just want to give a couple more minutes to wait just to see if anyone jumps on. Okay. No mic here. I'm listening from Grant County. Awesome. Thank you, Shayna. Yeah. Okay. Does anyone know if we're missing anyone? If not, I can get started. So this is for Grant County. Here's our team again. The overview that we'll be going through right now is going to be very similar to what you saw for the state. We're going to first examine the population, look at births and the birth rate, total fertility rate, deaths, and life expectancy, the inverse of mortality rate, migration, and look at who has been coming in and who has been leaving in terms of the age distribution of migration for the county. And then look at population pyramids and the race and ethnicity. Just to orient ourselves on where Grant County is in relation to the rest of the counties in the region that we're also examining today, and make some comparisons from Grant compared to the rest of the state that we're making projections for. Grant County has a population under the age of 18 of about 18.1%. That's a bit less than what we see for Oregon. And a population who is age 65 plus that is substantially larger than what we see for the state as a whole. So 31.4% compared to 18.6%. The population who is non-white is 9.7% for Grant compared to 25.9% for Oregon. And we see a person per household ratio of about 1.75. It's about 7.2 thousand people compared to 4,000 units. And that's a bit less, a smaller ratio than what we see for Oregon's total population to housing unit ratio. So where are we at in terms of population projections? We anticipate that the population will continue to decline for the foreseeable future. In the left of this dotted line, what we're showing is the population estimates coming from the census, the US Census Bureau that happened during those years. What we show to the right is our estimates in bold in the filled in box of what we think the population is going to be, as well as our previous population estimates for the county in the dotted line, right? A big thing contributing to our one of the things contributing is a smaller birth rate than what we have seen historically. So we anticipate that births will continue to decline over time compared to what we've observed in the past. Grant has had a fertility rate that has been a bit higher than Oregon in the past, and we think that that is going to approach what the rest of the state is going to approach the rest of the state over time. But it's expected to be higher than Oregon as a whole. The reason that births are declining in total is because the population who is between 15 to 45 is declining. And so that's why the biggest reason why we're seeing the declining number of births that are happening in the county. We think that deaths are going to increase in the future, and this is largely a function of an increasing older age population. We have seen that the county has a higher portion than most other counties who are 65 plus, and we expect that count to continue over time, and that's going to contribute to the higher than average mortality, higher mortality number of deaths that we're seeing than in previous years. This isn't to say that life expectancy is poor, or that the population has seen unhealthy or lower life expectancy than the state. Actually, we expect it to continue to increase and be slightly higher than the state as observed in some past years. The number of deaths is mostly happening because we see an older age population increasing over time. It's all being driven by that, actually. You know, migration rates, on average have been about, 20 individuals coming into the county per year. Previously, we had given a pretty generous increase in the number of migrants who are coming into the county. And we're definitely open to also doing that. Again, we're using right now as a feedback time to get ideas on how the county is potentially accommodating future population increase, and what like building permits and what like, what has been seen on the ground in terms of like cities seeing migrants coming in and new building permits happening. And but for right now, we're estimating about 20 individuals to come in per year through the migration forecast, and that's a little bit less than what we had last time. What does the age distribution look like of that? We're seeing predominantly out migration of individuals who are age 10 to 24, declines in this population, and this is also contributing to lower numbers of births in future years. Whereas in migration is predominantly from older age populations, which again is contributing to a population that is just at higher risk of mortality, being the age increases in the ages of 55 plus, predominantly driving the in-migration. So looking at this population pyramid, similar to what we saw at the state, but at a more rapid level, we're going to show population aging happening both through the census years and then through our projections. Again, population pyramid shows age distribution, males on the left-hand side, females on the right. And this is colored by generation. So in 1970, we saw most of the population was made up by boomer population who is relatively young. We're going to see the population age over time up until the 2020 census, where now the population count is 7.2, is still predominantly made up of the boomer generation, but is now much older, as you see. And now you see that like we have a really top heavy population pyramid here, where most of the population is made up of individuals who are older, who are 50 plus, and we can see where the 65 plus is really contributing to a large percentage of the Grant County population. So moving this forward through our forecast cycle, we expect a bit of this to increase. The groups older than 65, won't increase at quite the same rate because mortality rates are higher in those populations. So they're affecting those groups a bit more, but we're expecting the population to remain predominantly 60, or like continue to grow in the 65 plus for the foreseeable future. Again, it was 31.01% in 2020. We're expecting by 2050 this is potentially upwards of half of the population if past trends continue into the future. We expect that the grant population will continue to diversify, although decrease over time. Most of the increase is coming from growth in the Hispanic population, a little bit of the Asian Pacific Islander population. That puts us at about 10 minutes for questions, and I wanted to leave ample time for feedback and to be able to discuss with y'all about these, especially in relation to migration and the migration trends that we're seeing. I think that what we're accounting for is continued outward migration of a young age population, similar to what we've seen in the past. And I just want to know if we like this is what we're projecting forward, and if y'all think this is a reasonable assumption, or if we think that there is changes happening within the county or the UGBs within the county. Where we might expect a turnaround in terms of that population maybe coming back or growing.
I'm Tori and I'm from Economic Development in Grant County, and I know that a lot of our cities are working towards, we have 7 of our 9 cities are working on a housing needs analysis right now. And John Day, they have quite a few housing projects that are in the works. So that could potentially change. I know that there's folks move here for jobs and they're not able to find housing. So housing has been a big barrier for us, for people being able to stay here that want to move here.
Do you think this is reflected then in potential people moving, employed in the county, but not necessarily residing in the county?
What do you mean?
Just that you mentioned that people move here for jobs but can't find housing. Does this lead them to like find housing elsewhere? And so they're working in the county, or
Usually they go elsewhere.
oh, they just,
So-
okay,
So if like with these housing projects occurring, then hopefully that will help with the growth in the county.
I see. And then I guess, was it like, I think that, for us, looking at some of the counties, we were, pleasantly surprised to see some of the population growth that was happening in some other counties that we didn't think. Is this kind of an expected count in terms of a decrease from 2010 census count? Or is this something where it's like, you wonder, was there potential undercounting for the population as well?
I know that our county, it is difficult for when we do census, that folks, it's pretty anti-government out here. So not a lot of folks want to actually participate in the census. So that information could also be inaccurate. But I think there definitely is a higher senior population out here, and we have been declining, but I think that maybe folks not participating in the census can definitely impact what that looks like for us.
Totally. And then maybe one last question, in which UGBs are you seeing these, are the building permits for this new housing happening?
That is mostly right now in John Day. I know that there's been a few housing projects in a couple of our other cities as well. But the larger projects have been occurring in John Day.
Gotcha.
And some of our cities don't have UGBs.
Right.
But like it shows that like they have enough land, but that's been a barrier with UGBs potentially, like with some of our cities, is that folks don't want to split up their land to do smaller dwellings units, and people just want to live in more on more property out here.
Yeah.
I know like there's certain cities like in Prairie City, there's places that are considered UGB that have been in multi-generational families that most likely won't turn into housing. It'll stay like ranch. It'll stay like a ranch. So that's also a barrier too, is kind of where growth could happen in some of our cities.
You said that was Prairie.
Mhm.
Okay.
I think John Day did an updated census or a population estimate, and also I think Prairie did one as well somewhere where they paid to get it done.
You mean external from the census?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to, do you know if that's posted anywhere, or would love to just get that information if possible?
Yeah. What's your contact information, and I'll try to find those.
Yeah, I can email you after, I should have put my email on here as well. But if you even email ask PRC and just mention my name, it'll come to me as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And then if y'all are here for Mall here, we'll just wait a couple more minutes before we get started with that, unless there's any other questions for Grant.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Mm, Just gonna wait a couple more minutes before we get started for other people. Oh. Maybe we are the only ones. I hope someone shows up. I have so many questions from all here County. Hey, Christina. Oh, okay. Maybe wait to see if they jump back on. We can start a little late. If no one shows up, because it still should only take about 10 minutes to go through. Okay. I'll go ahead and go through this one. So this will be the section for Malheur County population forecasts from our group at Portland State University Population Research Center. Again, here is our team. And what we'll be going through as a general population overview, how the county compares to the rest of the state, projections for the total population through 2050 that we have made, how births, deaths, and migration have contributed to that total population change, with births being broken down with a total fertility rate, deaths being explained by life expectancy, and migration will have an age distribution to look at the age of people coming in and leaving the county, and what we're projecting that to look like in the coming years. We'll also look at population pyramids and see the increasing or change in population size, as well as the aging of the population, and then examine the change in race ethnicity that we are forecasting to happen for the county in the coming decades. So Malheur County is here. We're looking at it in relation to the rest of the counties in the region. Compared to Oregon, Malheur County is pretty young. The population who is aged younger than 18 is about 25.9%, whereas Oregon is 20.3%. The population age 65 plus is 16.7%, whereas the state is 18.6%. The population who is non-white is much larger for the county, 40.6%, compared to the state as a whole, which is 25.9%. This, of course, is predominantly driven by the large Hispanic population in the area. And the persons, oh, I forgot to put a units in there, but the persons per household ratio is about 2.7 for Malheur, where it is for Oregon about 2.31, so a higher ratio, less households per person or more persons per household, in Malheur County compared to the rest of the state. So we project that the population is expected to continue to grow into the foreseeable future before slightly declining maybe in between 2040 and 2050, but stabilizing around 33,000 individuals. This expectation is mostly driven by recent trends in migration, again, that we're seeing, and you can see that prior to the release of the 2020 census and our last migration forecasting cycle, we estimated that the population was expected to decline over time, decreasing slightly, but rather what we saw in the 2020 census is an increase over time, about a % increase, and we expect maybe a slight bit increase more into the future based off of recent trends of migration to be bolstering the size of the county moving forward. And I say this is mostly driven, by migration. If we look at births, everything left of the line is from data. And what we've observed in the past, in the past 20 years, and everything forward is from the projections. We expect births to maintain relatively stable, over time, somewhere between 300 and 400 births per year through 2045. And this is happening as we expect the total fertility rate to, approach and become just about maybe slightly lower than what we observe for Oregon County as a whole. Historically, Malheur County has had a pretty high fertility rate in the area going back to 2000, but we saw a big drop off in the number of births that were happening in the county in more recent years, and we expect a bit of that to come back, for it to jump back up a little bit. We think a bit of that is impacted by, COVID-19, but then continue on a downward decline through 2050 before stabilizing a little bit below 1.5 births per woman. We expect deaths to continue to increase over time, a little bit higher than what we've observed in the past. Was happened in 2016 to 2020, and we think a bit of that is being driven by COVID, but gradual increases to move into the future, both as the population slightly grows, but also ages over time as well. And here again, what we're showing is our own forecasts, our most recent forecast in the bold colors and the darkened colors, and the past forecast in the outline colors. So a little bit less deaths in near years and a little bit more deaths in farther off years than the last time that we made these forecasts. This is reflected in a changing life expectancy. Life expectancy 10 years ago was a bit higher than the state, and in the past 10 years was ever so slightly lower than the state. We expect this to rebound a little bit. Ultimately, its effect on the number of deaths that are happening here is only slight. So although this pattern looks like a pretty big jump, its actual impact in the total number of deaths is not very large, just because of where the mortality is actually happening in these older age populations. Migration is the big difference that we saw here. I think especially because the middle age population estimates saw estimated out migration from the county. But then we saw an increase in the population, sort of turning around the population count so that there was an increase from the 2010 to the 2020 census. And we expect continued positive, migration to come into the county, which is different than what we were anticipating in previous years. This positive net migration coming into the county is expected to impact, population such that we have an increase in the next, through 2040. But past 2040, the older age population is going to continue to grow. Mortality is going to catch up to the number of migration events that are happening, and that's going to eventually lead to a population decline. Sort of migration age that we've seen coming in is some old, some young working age population, a big increase in the 20 to 24 population who is coming in on average over time, but maybe slightly bringing in children into the area as well. And the big migration coming from this older age population. Here we're going to show the changing population composition through the census years and then into the forecast. So moving from 1970, from the first census where we have race are included in and are using for this analysis, we're going to show how Malheur became, whoops. Oh, I went back too far. So Malheur moving from a predominantly young age population to an older age population. If you go back to 1970, we have this population that is, very young. Definitely the biggest contributors to the total of the population are in this like boomer generation compared to other generations. And as we move to 2020, again, still in data, what we're seeing is a bit older population, still a fair bit of, young population compared to other counties. You see the biggest population here is Gen Z. And we do have a bit of a unique distribution in that it's a little bit larger for the male population, working age population compared to, the female population. It's a little bit lopsided in terms of the distribution. So moving forward, we expect that to level out a bit in terms of like the younger age populations, but to move forward for the older age population. And I just want to pause it at 2050 so we can examine that a little bit better. Oh my God, I just missed it again. I hate that it, automatically goes through to the next one. Okay, I'm just gonna let that slide. But basically the younger age population is going to be a little bit more balanced in terms of the sex ratio to men and women, and that difference that we saw in the working age population